October 2021 memo from Attorney General Garland targeting parents at school board meetings. Do you remember this?
Yes, Senator.
What happened was, as I'm sure you recall, we now know the Biden administration, the White House, the Secretary of Education solicited a letter from the National School Board Association. They ginned it up. It was fake from beginning to end. They ginned it up, calling for law enforcement scrutiny against parents, tax-paying parents who were going to school board meetings, inquiring what their children were being taught, inquiring about face masks, critical race theory, and Attorney General Garland, you talk about bowing to political pressure. When the White House demanded he activate the FBI against these parents, amazingly, unbelievably, he did it. And he issued this memorandum in October of 2021. All of this time later, that memorandum has still never been formally rescinded. Even after the National School Board Association withdrew their letter, admitted they had been wrong to call parents potential domestic terrorists who were merely raising questions about what their children were being taught, Garland never apologized for it. He never did anything about it. It is still in effect. Here's my question for you. As Attorney General, if and when you are confirmed, will you finally rescind that memorandum and do right on behalf of...
This may look like a routine confirmation hearing, but it's actually a stress test for how far federal power can stretch before it collides with constitutional rights. What's really being tested here is whether law enforcement exists to protect citizens or to monitor them when their speech becomes inconvenient. This raises broader questions about how easily political pressure can turn into institutional action. In this video, we'll break down how one controversial memo exposed the fragile line between public safety and political control.
Thank you, Senator. I'm sitting here in the chairman's seat, General Bondi. It's a great feeling of power.
Do you have documents you want me to review?
Maybe some things I'd like you to sign. Let me just ask you here, and I think I may be your last interlocutor for the day, so congratulations. You've just done fantastic. Thank you for answering all of our questions. Let me just ask you about another of the abuses that this past administration perpetrated that is still in place, and I'm referring to the October 2021 memo from Attorney General Garland targeting parents at school board meetings. Do you remember this?
Yes, Senator.
What happened was, as I'm sure you recall, we now know the Biden administration, the White House, the Secretary of Education solicited a letter from the National School Board Association. They ginned it up. It was fake from beginning to end. They ginned it up, calling for law enforcement scrutiny against parents, tax-paying parents who were going to school board meetings, inquiring what their children were being taught, inquiring about face masks, critical race theory, and Attorney General Garland, you talk about bowing to political pressure. When the White House demanded he activate the FBI against these parents, amazingly, unbelievably, he did it. And he issued this memorandum in October of 2021. All of this time later, that memorandum has still never been formally rescinded. Even after the National School Board Association withdrew their letter, admitted they had been wrong to call parents potential domestic terrorists who were merely raising questions about what their children were being taught, Garland never apologized for it. He never did anything about it. It is still in effect. Here's my question for you. As Attorney General, if and when you are confirmed, will you finally rescind that memorandum and do right on behalf of all of these parents who have been wrongly, unjustly targeted by the FBI and DOJ?
Senator, I have not yet read the memo. If I am confirmed, I will read the memo and I will do the right thing, just like I told senators on both sides of the aisle regarding their issues.
Good. I look forward to you doing that, and I would hope this is something you could do on the first day after you're confirmed, to send a message to parents and law-abiding citizens everywhere. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. I bet the parents who went to these meetings, they're Republicans or Democrats, they have no partisanship, but they want to know that their First Amendment rights will be protected. And you rescinding that memo formally after, frankly, the current Attorney General lied to us about it for years would send a tremendous message. Let me just ask you about the one other thing, and this is something near and dear to me. We talked about this when you came to my office. The Department of Justice administers a fund called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Fund. This is a fund that helps pay for the health care bills of Americans who have been exposed to nuclear radiation by the government through no fault of their own. In the West and other parts of the country, the Department of Justice has administered that program for years. Senator Orrin Hatch actually wrote the initial bill. It has been in existence since 1990. It's been supported by senators from both parties. It's extremely important to my state because the state of Missouri, we have a lot of nuclear radiation that has occurred, that's still in our groundwater, still in our soil, not cleaned up yet. My question for you is, since you'll be in charge of administering it, will you administer that program fairly and equitably? Will you defend it? Will you make sure that radiation victims who are under the statute entitled to compensation from their government get what they deserve?
Senator, I was speaking about about that with someone yesterday because I did not know. Again, there's going to be a lot, if I am confirmed, that I don't know. That's why it's so important to keep an open dialogue with every senator from every state. And yes, I am committed to looking at that. And I did not realize you had that horrific problem in your state.
Thank you very much. Thank you for answering our questions. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
The room had grown quiet when Senator Josh Hawley leaned forward in the chairman's seat and delivered what might become one of the most consequential questions of the day. After hours of testimony, after layers of carefully worded responses, he asked Pam Bondi to confront something that had been left hanging in Washington for years. A single memorandum issued in October of 2021 that quietly changed the relationship between the federal government and ordinary Americans who dared to speak up. He wasn't talking about policy. He was talking about power, about whether the Department of Justice would continue to carry the weight of a document that had labeled concerned parents as threats for nothing more than attending local school board meetings and asking what their own families were being taught. That moment was not theatrical. It was not loud, but it was devastating in its clarity. Hawley laid out what had happened. A letter requested by the White House, pushed through a national association, used as justification for federal scrutiny of everyday people who had done nothing more than show up and speak. And then the memo, still active, still sitting inside the machinery of the federal system, even after the original justification collapsed, and even after its authors admitted it never should have existed. The question he posed to Bondi was simple and profound. Would she be willing on her first day to formally end it? What that exchange revealed goes far beyond a single piece of paper. It revealed how power moves in Washington when no one is watching. It showed how political pressure can turn into institutional action and how those actions can remain long after the headlines fade. In 2021, the Justice Department didn't just respond to a letter. It sent a message that participation in civic life could be interpreted through a lens of suspicion. That moment quietly shifted the balance between citizens and the state. And years later, the fact that the memo still exists tells its own story. Pam Bondi did not dodge the question. She didn't promise what Hawley wanted to hear. Instead, she said something both cautious and revealing. She said she would read the memo, and she said she would do the right thing. Those words carry weight, but they also carry uncertainty. In a system built on legal language and institutional inertia, doing the right thing is never as simple as saying it. It requires action, and action inside a massive federal bureaucracy is never guaranteed. Yet Hawley pressed the point, framing it not as a partisan issue, but as a question of constitutional principle. The people targeted by that memo were not defined by party labels. They were parents, they were citizens, they were people who believed they had the right to speak without fear of being placed under a federal microscope. The First Amendment was not meant to belong to one side of the aisle. It was meant to belong to everyone. And when a government memo casts a shadow over that right, the damage is not abstract, it is real. This is what made that moment so powerful. It wasn't just about reversing a past decision. It was about whether the Justice Department would acknowledge that something had gone wrong. Institutions rarely apologize. They rarely admit mistakes. They move forward and hope memory fades. But democracy depends on something stronger than institutional amnesia. It depends on accountability. Then, in a quiet shift, Hawley moved to another issue that revealed a different side of the same system. He spoke about a compensation program that has existed for decades, designed to help Americans who were exposed to nuclear materials through no fault of their own. In his state, he explained, the effects are still in the ground, still in the water, still part of everyday life. This was not about ideology. It was about responsibility. When the government causes harm, even unintentionally, does it step forward to make things right? Bondi's response was, again, cautious but open. She admitted there was much she still had to learn, and she committed to listening. In a city where certainty is often feigned and humility is rare, that admission mattered. It showed the weight of what she is being asked to take on. The Department of Justice is not just a legal institution, it is a moral one. It decides when the power of the state is used and when it is restrained. It decides who is protected and who is scrutinized. What we witnessed in that hearing was not just a confirmation exchange, It was a glimpse into how fragile the line between justice and overreach can be. One memo, one letter. One decision made under political pressure can ripple through years of American life. And undoing it takes courage, clarity, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. The real question now is whether those words, "I will do the right thing," will become action. Whether that memo will finally be rescinded. Whether the Justice Department will send a message that speaking up is not something to be watched, but something to be respected. And whether programs meant to help those harmed by past government actions will be administered with fairness and integrity. This is why these hearings matter, not because of sound bites, but because of the choices that follow. In a democracy, power must always be answerable. When it isn't, trust erodes. And when trust erodes, the foundation of the system begins to crack. The moment you just watched was not about the past. It was about the future, about whether the next chapter of American justice will be written with humility or with the same quiet arrogance that left a flawed memo standing for years. The answers will not come in words. They will come in what is done when the cameras are gone. If you believe that accountability still matters, that the Constitution still means something, and that government should never be beyond question, then stay with us. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA. Support our work to expose the truth.